Hey, everybody, welcome to L-Source Exchange. I'm Sal, and I'm joined again by Jordan Blum. Jordan, thanks for being here, dude.
Thanks for having me back.
My pleasure. My pleasure. We had such a great time talking about Secret Wars, but I'm excited because we're talking about, comics, what we've read, stuff that we're excited about. But the thing that we should really be talking about first is, of course, the new book from the Minor Threats universe that you teased in our first episode, where you were like, well, maybe we'll see more in that world. The Alternates, coming from Dark Horse Comics. I'm lucky enough to have actually read the first issue or two of the series, and there is such a dope tone that this thing sets that is so starkly different, yet also spiritually emblematic of the Minor Threats universe. It's something where it's like, Minor Threats could have existed in a vacuum. It could have just been its own thing, but it balloons out into this other place that, like, I think there is like a cameo, but otherwise it really doesn't touch on anything that we saw from the previous volume. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The idea was brought to us by Tim Seeley, and it was, what was so great is we never want to repeat ourselves, and the idea was, sorry, my trash is getting collected, of course, right now.
Sure.
Of this. That's all that slamming going on there. Tim, brought us this idea, and like to me, it's more like a spiritual cousin in that it's not a story about low-level supervillains. It's a story about kind of B-level heroes who get rebooted into a Vertigo world and then come back to their more two-dimensional superhero world and kind of have withdrawal from having these Vertigo lives, if you will. And what I loved is, again, what I think connects it to Minor Threats is we always want to kind of tell superhero stories that have never been told and tell them from perspectives that we've never seen. So I had never read a story of what it is like to go from being a kind of Silver Age goofy hero to suddenly being this mature reader's kind of elevated comics character, and then go back. And I think there's something really fun about, even in the original Minor Threats, this kind of meta fiction, we were really kind of playing with concepts of, again, goofy Silver Age characters being dragged into the Frank Miller, Alan Moore kind of modern age, like how difficult it would be for a calendar man to suddenly find himself in the Dark Knight Returns. And even though we weren't saying that in the story, it was kind of the backdrop. And in a similar way, we're not saying this is Vertigo, but I think we're playing with those kinds of concepts.
Oh, you get that immediately. Like, from the jump, you're kind of like, oh, this feels like a classic, but it doesn't feel like it is. This feels like it is at home with it, as opposed to it being a kind of pastiche or an homage to it. Like, this would be right at home with something like Vamps or Kid Eternity or something like from '93 that is this kind of really like dark, but only dark because that is the world we're choosing to depict at this time, like kind of tone. I love the concept overall, and especially the lack of hand-holding that is inherent in the story. Now, this is, of course, co-written by yourself, by Tim Seeley, and Patton Oswalt returns to write it. The art sells the hell out of this book as well.
Oh my God.
We should talk about the collaborators, because there's 3 different artists on this book.
2 different artists.
2 different.
It's Chris Mitten, who has done a lot of Hellboy and such, and then Tess Fowler, who did one of our covers from the last series. And I think what's really fun is Chris is doing all of the kind of present day stuff of what these characters are going through and having returned back to our world, and then Tess is doing these sort of flashbacks to when they were in the Ledge, this other universe. And I think Chris's stuff really reminds me of like Steve Yao or some of those early Grant Morrison Doom Patrol kind of style art. And then Tess's art is much more, it's watercolor paintings. So it almost reminds me more of the covers to those patrols and things. So I think you get the whole experience. I think that's supposed to, invoke that, where, I loved all the pieces of those, the Sandman covers and the interior Sandman art, and they're always very different, and there's always a contrast. So we thought that would be kind of fun to even work into the art itself.
Yeah. Do you want to give us the elevator pitch? I mean, we kind of talked, we danced around it, but I want to hear like what you say to people to sell them on this book.
Yeah, so like I said, it was these C-list heroes, who there was a universal threat, that almost kind of invasion from another reality, and these heroes sacrificed themselves to close it,
Yeah.
instead of the Continuum, the heroes who we had met in the previous Minor Threats.
Mhm.
And what happened is they end up being transported to this kind of this alternate mirror world where they led amazing lives that for instance, Crab Louie, who was just this kind of atomic monster, suddenly became the avatar to all crustacean kind and almost achieved godhood. And they again kind of had these expanded existence for about 3 years, and then they were brought back to the minor threats reality, and they all missed it. They had a really hard time adapting to their lives. And how do you go from being a crab god to suddenly being a dad, and
Yeah.
and just a minor superhero? So they form a support group because they're all struggling to kind of reclaim their old lives. And what they discover is that some of the elements from this mirror universe have made it to the Minor Threats universe in the form of a street drug, and people are taking this and turning into weird, strange Grant Morrison-like creatures. And
Yeah.
it's up to our heroes to kind of investigate and find out what's going on. But there's also the threat of them taking it themselves and sort of relapsing. It's really a story about recovery,
Yeah.
about kind of letting go of this kind of heightened version of yourself and accepting that you can live without it and be this, kind of reclaim, who you were. So that is it in a nutshell. It's a pretty long pitch, but it's a really kind of weird book. So I think it needs that.
It does. It is such a treat, and there's nothing like it on the shelf today, and that's what's so, I think, appealing. But it also is very much evocative of the comics that made us, like the kind of comics where it was like it felt dangerous to read when you were like 12 or 13, and no one's looking over your shoulder to see what you're buying at the comic book store, and you're like, I'm getting all this stuff that is really mature readers only, and dealing with adult themes and talking about like the concepts like addiction and about like drugs and about like just the need to be special, and how that never really goes away, and in adulthood it's even more like potent, and there's a lot in here that's just like, it's really, really exciting. And I'm glad you brought up Louis, because clearly he is like the kind of, I don't know, he's one of the more complicated ones, although they're all pretty complicated in this series, because he's the one who feels the most like he misses it the most.
Mm-hmm.
Like he misses being there the most, because he was a god. I mean, like, and it's funny because you could point to all the influences throughout. Like you could be like, oh, okay, like he's kind of like a pastiche of like a Swamp Thing meets a Metamorpho kind of idea. And
Yeah.
I love that. I'm just like, oh, like, yeah, what if Metamorpho was a god? And I'm like, yeah, I'm in. But yeah, man, I'm just hyped for this book. When does the first issue drop?
The first issue comes out September 13th, so Wednesday next week.
Yep.
It's a 4-issue limited series, very much like the first Minor Threats. And, hopefully if people dig it, maybe there's more in the future. But we really tell, I think, like a very complete story with it. And it was really fun to play with Tim, who is a comic book, hero of mine, and I've been reading his stuff since Hack Slash, and Local Man is one of my favorite books right now. Pat and I joke like Local Man's the book that got away, because it's like, oh, that would have been a great Minor Threats to do. Except I will say, him using all the Image characters to ground it like makes it the perfect Image book too.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we're huge fans of Tim. So we were so delighted that he brought this idea to us and was inspired by the original series. And it does tie a little bit. You'll get a little peek at what Frankie's up to, as she's kind of setting up some stuff that's going to come down the road. But really, it's a contained story. And one of the things we liked in the world building of it was, if Redport, where the first Minor Threats is set, is kind of our our Staten Island. This is set in Bridger Square, which is our Brooklyn. It's a little hipper. It's a little more artsy. And we wanted the kind of characters to reflect that and the things that go on there. So we decided, we're building out Twilight City a little, piece by piece, and we're like, well, there's all these boroughs. Let's play over here.
Yeah. I again, it's one of those things where you are rewarded for remembering or being a fan of the Minor Threats world, but it also is very much like you could jump into this cold. Like the way I look at it, it's if you love Minor Threats, you're gonna dig the hell out of alternates, and if you hate Minor Threats, you may still probably love alternates anyway. By the way, speaking of Minor Threats, trade paperback came out obviously, I believe in June, right?
Yes, trade came out. We had a really cool event at the store called Revenge of in Los Angeles. If you're in Los Angeles, you should absolutely check it out. They have an amazing pinball selection, and they're run by these guys that are production designers. So the whole place feels like a spaceport. They just keep adding to it. There's like a canteen now. And so we had a release party there where they built us a stage and booths to sign, and they designed the whole space to be Minor Threats. And we had stand-up comedians, including Patton, do sets. We had a band. We tried to kind of make like a block party release party, kind of add a little fun to the traditional comic release party. So that was a blast. So we're hoping to do more with them there. There's some alternate stuff coming up that we're going to announce soon. So that was a blast. Then we got to celebrate in San Diego and have a panel. We got to be the entire back of the Dark Horse booth, which blew my mind. And it's very surreal. It feels like I'm waiting for someone to just kind of wake up and be like, wait, why did we give you all this stuff? Like, you guys take this away. They don't deserve to make comics. But until then,
hell no. No, this is well earned, my friend. I love really quick, just as a point of order. When I got the previews for this, there's this really dope. The first cover for the first issue is just, I believe that's who did the first the cover for the first issue?
So there's a few. So Scott Hepburn, who's the artist on Minor Threats, is doing all the A covers.
Okay, cool.
Yes, and then we have, I'm going to forget some names. Fabio Moon is doing one of the for one of the first issue covers. We are doing Martin Simmons. Who's incredible, did a Mary the Multi-Monster cover for us.
Tony Fleeks.
Tony Fleeks, local man. Yeah. Did a Persona cover for us. And then Tim did an amazing cover of Crab Louie and Mary the Multi-Monster. So it's Murderer's Row. It's insane. And there's even more for every issue.
Yeah. For issue 2, we didn't get a cover. We have this really cool kind of like Dark Horse don't show this to anybody cover. It's just this it's this very warning caution tape yellow. And I love it. And it's kind of, it like makes me feel like that should almost be the cover, where it's kind of like this don't let anyone see this kind of thing. It's their like production header, because it was like a work in progress. I think I sent you. I don't even know if we've done the final lettering pass on it, but I was like, I want you to see more of the story. I'm so glad, because I was hooked after the first issue. I'm like, I gotta see more. And then I was like, oh my god, he sent me the other issue. That's right. Oh yes. But yeah, I kind of love the you see occasionally people like to play with it. I know Zdarsky loves to do the with the Sex Criminals, they did a whole bunch of crazy ass covers, one of which was this is a production, how the sausage gets made comic book cover. And I was like, I think alternates could get away with that kind of thing, or it's like it would be a disservice, because I know that the cover that I got, I believe that's the Scott Hepburn and Ian Herring cover, was so dope. But I kind of like this is dangerous. Don't,
Well, we should have let Tess do a nudity cover or something like that. You got to cover up.
Yes, and get like a poly bag and everything.
Yeah, it was very funny, because obviously, working with Tim, who writes one of my favorite books, Money Shot, loves to push the boundaries. But it was actually Tess Fowler who was like that in the first issue. There's a little bit of a monster orgy, I guess is the best way to put it. And that was even more extreme in the initial layouts. And I was like somehow the prude, clutching my pearls, being like, I think we should put a little more focus on the character, maybe a little less like werewolf humping over here and there. So But it was like, no, this is what they're capturing, that thing that you said, like that Vertigo book, that Preacher book, right? I remember reading initially Preacher on an airplane trip and like kind of having to read to myself because you're like, I'm a kid and I shouldn't have these comics. There's something like dangerous about those Vertigo comics. And I think it was really great because there's some of that in this. So maybe not the best comic to give little kids.
Yeah, I might have
maybe
it
a
on
teenager
higher
finds
shelf.
it and hides it from his parent, and we're recreating the Vertigo experience.
I think that's something that we need in the world of comics is a book where you're kind of like you have to hide it. When you get it, you're kind of like, oh, I hope nobody like catches me reading this. Although, thankfully, with the cover, you're kind of like, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who's gonna avoid it because it's just like it's so catching. But
I love to see a little. I want to read about depressed superheroes in a support group. Like, I don't know if it sells the
well, that might not. No, the first 3 pages, you're like, okay, I get what's going on here. This is dope. And I like your reference to Morrison. Yeah, it does have a very Morrisonian kind of like vibe to it.
I mean, they're my favorite writer of all time. And, when I think of Doom Patrol and Animal Man, like totally. 2/3 of those original Vertigo books, it was that. Oh, I guess never mind. There's Sandman and Swamp Thing, but half of those books were Morrison, and they were great at taking, again, Animal Man and Swamp Thing were kind of these forgotten C-list heroes who had these kind of goofier pasts, especially Animal Man, then were brought into this like, wow, these are really dense, heavy books, and I love them. So that was definitely like the target was, can we do some sort of ode to this person that's inspired us so much?
Totally. So yeah, man, what are you reading right now? What's coming out right now that you're kind of like, oh, this is something I can't put down? Because I know that last time we talked, I think you and I were the lone dissenters. We were reading the Aaron Punisher run, and that was.
There's a new one, right? There's a new Punisher coming out.
New Punisher, yeah.
I'll be honest. Other than the X books, which we'll talk about in a second, because I think they're on fire. They're amazing right now. I've been super into DC. Like I've always, I don't say, in the past I maybe have leaned a bit more Marvel here and there, especially like post New 52. I kind of had, one foot out a little bit, and I'd come back. Rebirth was great. And there's tons of great books published within that era. But I think I always leaned heavier with Marvel, and I think DC is crushing it across the board. I'm hard pressed to find a bad DC book. I think the Superman books in particular have never been better. I love the main Williamson Superman book. I think it really pinpointed to me what that I know it's like a thing, cliche people say. Metropolis is such a character, and when done right, it's more interesting to me than Gotham or any of the other cities. Like, I think it has so much personality, and he's nailing that. And then with Kenny Johnson, I had not read a ton of his previous Action comic stuff, so I went back and I read the Warworld saga.
Yes.
That's an instant classic in my book.
I can't have a conversation about Superman without Warworld coming up because of like how it found its audience so quickly and made its mark in such a profound way. And that's funny. That's one of those books where you could tell like Johnson just like he had a vision and he was allowed to execute it for like to the nth degree, where like Warworld was one of those things where I'm like, I can imagine people like upstairs being like, I don't know, like after about like 6 months, we might want to get him back on Earth. And it's like, no, we got to go all the way with this series. I think there are people who are like, I'm a Superman fan now because I read Warworld.
And there's so much good Superman out there, but I feel like we've been hungry for a little while, and
totally,
it's one of those stories where it boils everything down to the essence of the character, where you can strip him of his powers and this and that, and it's the idea of Superman, the concept of Superman that is so powerful and big and important. And to me, I have to cry at least once for a Superman story to be a good Superman story, and I definitely cried to Core World.
I am so on board with you, especially when it comes to like it's Superman's time right now. Like we got the Williamson run, which is great, and Jamal Campbell's art on that book is just next level. I can't believe that book looks the way it does. And it was once Far Sector came out, I'm like, oh, you gotta scoop this guy up like tomorrow. Like it's next level stuff. But you've got that. You've got the new Action Comics run. You also have Mark Waid's Black Label Superman book.
That Lex Luthor one.
That Lex Luthor one, which like. As I understand it, I think Waid has mentioned that he's like, this is more or less a sequel to Birthright. Like it's in the same world. It's in the same, like, he's like, I'm thinking of that when I'm writing this. So there is some connective tissue between it, but also like it stands on its own as its own Superman story. And it was like, oh no. Oh, hang on. There we go. All right, cool.
Am I back?
Yep. Oh yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. Here. Let's see. All right, that should be good.
Sorry, you were going to Mark Waid, which I would love to talk. Yeah.
Yes. Waid's doing this. I'm so excited to see this like oversized Superman story. The first issue was great. I think we're only getting 2 more issues of that, which is a shame, but it's dope. And Brian Hitch is of course drawing it. It looks great. I love the concept. It's such an elevator pitch story where it's like Lex Luthor's dying and he wants Superman to help him. Go. And you're just like, yeah, well, Waid is gonna do it because he's crushing it on World's Finest.
Well, that's I think been incredible. World's Finest to me is such a good showcase and almost reminding DC, hey, you have all these toys. Here's Metamorpho. Here's the Metal Men. Here's all these things that are so awesome that maybe publish one less Batman book and let's tackle these. Yeah. But it feels like they're listening because we're getting Hawk Girl, and we're getting new Green Lanterns, and we're getting a new Flash, and it feels like for the first time in a long time, the scope is opening there, and they're realizing, oh my God, each one of these properties has so much potential if we put the right people on it. And Waid's writing half of them. He's writing Shazam, he's writing that Teen Titans Year One book, and he's knocking them all out of the park.
Yeah. And I think it's smart too, especially with World's Finest and Shazam, that it's like, oh, well, you also have Dan Mora drawing it, where it's like, oh, this is, if you weren't already convinced that these characters are fun and cool, like here's Dan Mora drawing essentially the distillation of everything, of the ideal version of that character. Like here is the Doom Patrol, like you've always seen them, but now suddenly think they're awesome. If you hadn't already, if you weren't already convinced from the show and the long history and, multiple different runs. I'm kind of partial myself to the Nick Darrington, Gerard Way Doom Patrol run, which I'd never seen anything like that before. And I was like, nice.
I mean, the art in it was unbelievable. But Doom Patrol's kind of like Daredevil, weirdly, where there's a lot of like iconic runs where you're like, oh, I didn't know this many people, like great people worked on this character, but this is why this book's always good, because kind of from Grant Morrison forward, then you get that one, you get the Nick Darrington one, then you get the current one right now. Dennis Culver.
Dennis Culver's doing a great job. Yeah.
Burnham. Incredible. It's so great. And he's doing these almost one and done Twilight Zone stories where these characters work so well within. So I really like the focus of that book.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Daredevil, because Daredevil just wrapped up its epic Zdarsky run, which I think people are already hailing as a modern classic. I am hard pressed to find 2 bad Daredevil runs. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I could think of maybe one. I'm like, yeah, that one. But you go down the list of like from Miller to Nocenti to Zdarsky to even like more recent creators like Charles Soule. You've got Mark Waid. You've got like everybody on that book. It's just, and it's always something new. Bendis.
It was Bendis, then followed by Brubaker.
Yeah.
Fraction come after that? No, did he never did Daredevil run? Then I think it was Waid. Yeah. Then it might have been Waid right after that. Like that's like 10 years of nonstop. Daredevil. Like it's crazy.
Yeah, and any one of those could be a thing where you're like, oh, that's like a really like, man, you gotta love Daredevil because of that singular run. But it's like, oh no, it's a chain of great runs up until recently, where it's just been, Daredevil's such a popular book now as a result of I think the exposure he's gotten thanks to word of mouth and Zdarsky's work, Cicchetto's art, and it's just been great. Yeah.
Well, I have a theory on why there is that, and I think what it has to do with is Daredevil, let's say in the 60s didn't have the immediate following that say like Batman or Spider-Man did. So you have a street level vigilante character where you can kind of break all the toys and get away with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what led a lot of these writers and artists to take huge risks on the character, where it's like, I can kill off anyone, I can destroy his life. Who cares about the supporting characters? Like, you can only break J. Jonah Jameson or
Alfred or
so
whatever.
Far.
Yeah.
But in Daredevil, it's like, have at it. Karen's dead. Boom.
Yeah, and she's never coming back. Like
she's never coming back. And I think, I don't know. Like, obviously, there's a lot of death and rebirth and stuff, but the Daredevil stuff always feels more permanent. Yeah, and it always feels high stakes. Definitely. In a way, like the character doesn't feel safe in the way that Batman or Spider-Man does, kind of month to month.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There's a question I think that Chip posed a while back. Is Born Again a perfect comic book?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. We're all on the same page.
I mean, the David Mazzucchelli art sends it over, I think.
Right?
Like, yeah.
You
can't beat that. It is a very perfect comic.
Right? I think it's okay, by the way, to use that term liberally. Like, I know a lot of people approach comics or art the same way that like those annoying college professors did, where they're like, oh, only God can get an A in my class. And it's like, that you only Watchmen is a perfect comic book, some nonsense like that. And I'm just like, I'm more liberal with it now than I ever was as a kid, like where I'm like, no, I think that's perfect. I think that like there's nothing that I would change about it. Ergo, I think that it's flawless, how
I know? It's because for every one of those, I'll read 300 bad comics. that story or stories like it are enough for me to continue searching for more because they were that good, right? Yeah. And then you find them, and then they happen. That isn't to say there aren't good comics all the time. There are, but when you follow characters and you follow writers, you don't always get them. And then something comes along and you get a Mr. Miracle or something like that, and they're just like, oh yeah. Comics can be the perfect storytelling medium, and there are perfect stories within comics, and they come out pretty frequently, but you're gonna have to kind of, if you're a weekly reader, you kind of sort through the mess a little bit.
Absolutely. Now that's one of those things that's like kind of remarkable about the era we're in comics, where I think, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this one. I think, and I've said this before out loud, and thankfully I'm still here, but like that there are more good comics today than there ever have been.
I agree with you.
Right, not just because you also co-wrote the alternates, but
a lot of them are at Dark Horse. I don't know. I completely agree with you. I can tell because of how many I'm buying. Right, and how much I wish I could read more, because I feel like I'm even limited sometimes to the big two and a few, Image, Dark Horse, whatever. And I'm really lucky. I'm on a few of the publishers' comp things, so I'm just accidentally discovering things that are so amazing. And it's almost impossible to keep up with all of it. So yeah. I think pound for pound, you're getting great books every month. Yeah.
Because I mean, people talk about, I think 1986 being like the perfect year for comic books, or like the best year in comics history. Which, like, look, it was a good year. That's like saying, oh, God, what's the movie year everybody talks about? It's like
1999.
1999, where it's like the biggest or best year in movie history. And I'm like, I mean, I think 1989 has you beat on that one, but
I think the 1986 thing is where there was a shift maybe in the types of stories being told, and obviously
100%.
The ones that came out within that year were iconic and trailblazing and unique. And obviously we've gotten versions of those since then, so they felt fresh at the time. But also, and not to shit on this comic, I'm just picking a random one, like there was 12 issues of Blue Devil that came out that year that no one really goes back and reads.
That's true.
Maybe, sorry, Blue Devil fans, tell me if it's good. I'll go read.
Let me tell you something. There are Blue Devil fans, and they have sent me Blue Devil. Like I think I have the entire run of the Paris Cullins Blue Devil.
He's a great
run.
artist. Great artist.
It looks great.
Yes.
And we've done, I think, at least one issue of Blue Devil on this channel, and I'm like, we won't be doing any more, but I do think it looks cool.
Right. But you know what I mean, right?
Yeah. It's true. Yeah. There's 60 issues of Quasar.
Yeah. Some of them are good. Mark Grunwald. I prefer his
Yeah.
Captain America run.
Exactly. I prefer.
We got Greg Capullo out of Quasar. You gotta get that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Which, yeah, I mean, and I think thanks to Quasar, the only thing I think of when I think of Quasar is that pregnancy issue, which it's just that cover where I'm like,
Yes.
Did Junior come out of this year? I don't know.
He's doing the Demi Moore, right? Kind of.
Yeah, that's right.
So
bizarre.
The cover. But yeah, my point is that in 1986,
yes,
there were tons of mediocre comics, and then 3 or 4 giant hits. I think now it's much easier to find across the board.
Every year. It's a Sophie's Choice for the Eisners. Like every year, there is no clear winner. There's no clear like best original series where you're like, oh, that one. You're like, oh shit, like they're up against this, and this. Oh man, because there are always going to be outliers or transcendent artists and writers in every period, but not all of them are going to or have been utilized to the best extent of their abilities. Yet now we're seeing it, and it's coming, and every year there's like another handful or more of books that deserve all the accolades, and of course we have 2.
Yeah, it's crazy, and so much stuff is just kind of being done in its own fun little niche worlds. Like all the Brubaker graphic novels that just keep coming out, and
I know
there's never a dip in quality that you almost take them for granted, right? And I feel like the same thing. Like if you're a horror comic reader, there's never been a better time for horror comics than maybe right before the hearings. Maybe it's the last time horror comics were this good. It's incredible. And look, are there dips sometimes with some of your favorite characters, or maybe you don't love a writer who's on a current run? Yeah, sure, absolutely. But again, for me, an X-Men fan who has watched the book, go from the top book to kind of almost the forgotten book to back to top.
Deliberate marginalization. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This has been thrilling. It's like 10 years. How long has Krakoa been going on? I can't even.
It's only 3, I think. I think Hawks and Pox dropped in 2019. So we've only really been in it for 3 years, but it feels like as long. It's funny. You think about I have a poster up here. It's literally just pulled out of an issue of the Claremont Jim Lee X-Men issue, where it shows you just everyone's mind's eye image of the X-Men. It's drawn by Jim Lee, and it's got Rachel Summers looking mournfully over at Scott and Jean because it's implying that she's so sad. You got Beast and Archangel and Boom Boom and Cannonball and Cable and Bishop, and everybody's there. And there's a little thing that says the best is yet to come. And I'm like, and ironically, it's in the best-selling X-Men comic of all time, and it will never sell better than it is right now. So no, technically it will not be the best, but
not for the industry, but story-wise, yes, but the best is still, but
but you think about that, and it's that era is a very small window of time, and yet we consider it to be we think about it oh well, X-Men Red and X-Men Blue, or X-Men Blue and X-Men Gold, those were teams for years, right? It's maybe one, whereas Krakoa, people will be. I mean, there's debate about will Krakoa be the status quo for the MCU X-Men? It's that important and that big.
Yeah, it was the shot in the arm that it needed, because I feel like leading up to it, we were just spinning in Claremont circles, kind of playing the hits, and it just needed to move forward, and this was it, and it was great. It was it was so exciting at the time when they first launched it. There's so many great ideas explored. Sometimes you'd be like, okay, let's move the story forward. And they did. And this Hellfire Gala was one of the best comics I've read this year.
Yeah.
Jerry Duggan, I'll preface as a friend, but I told him to his face, it had me on the edge of my seat. I had no idea what was going to happen next. So much got done. It felt like a giant payoff to his X-Men run, where it was it retroactively made that run even better. And now it was the first time I was scared for them in such a long time. And I loved feeling that. And I don't think anyone besides Claremont writes Kitty Pryde better than him. That follow-up issue where she's putting grenades into AIM people, phasing them into AIM people. That's amazing. So I'm thrilled by what is happening, and it came just the right time, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, X-Men has it's funny there, you know, Marvel's ready to put X-Men on the map. That was one of the log lines that came out recently. And I'm like, what do you call the last 3 years? Like
It's been your top selling book for the last
like I don't think there's
Where
ever
else
been
do you want them to go.
Yeah, and I don't think there's ever been a time when there are more best-selling offshoot X-Men titles.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, I don't want to rag on any particular publisher, but when any publisher rolls out with like, here's a whole new onslaught, no pun intended, of like titles, you know, and you find out that like most of them get canceled because, you know, reader fatigue, finances at all. But now we're in a place where like there are titles that have firmly reestablished themselves, as well they should, in the pull boxes across America, where it's like X-Force, X-Men, Excalibur was a book that ran for such a while that like became this other thing. You know, you have Spurrier doing, or Kieran Gillen doing such amazing stuff with the Immortal X-Men, a title that never existed until now. That I expect X-Men Red to be a title that they'll continue to push for the next 5 to 10 years. You know, it's just remarkable.
Well, I think what they did is they learned one of the best lessons from the 90s when there was a ton of X-Men books, which is each one needs its own identity, right? You can't just have a bunch of X-Men books that all kind of feel the same. Whereas in the 90s, right, you had, this is the government team that's a little more comedic, you know, this is your core X-Men book. This is, you know, militaristic youth X-Force, and this is, you know, Wolverine solo samurai stuff over here. Yeah. And I think these books did the same thing. Like, we're going to have a pirate book, and it's going to be Marauders, you know, X-Force is going to be our CIA of Krakoa, and it's going to be espionage and stuff like that. You know, the main X-Men book be the superhero book. And they nailed it, you know, that you were getting different flavors, you know.
Absolutely.
And it did really come together.
That New Mutants book that Hickman and Rod Rice were working on for the longest time was such, like, that was my book. I'm like, just watching the X-Men in space, such a good series. And I hope that like that is the lesson, like, you know, that the lesson isn't to constantly shake things up to the point of like irrecognizability or unrecognizability, but like rather to move forward, like you said, just push forward, you know. Like I think there's some titles that have, I don't know if the titles necessarily haven't benefited, but the characters in the world have. Like, you mentioned J. Jonah Jameson earlier, and it's like, once Zdarsky made JJ find out who Spider-Man is again, but in a more like My Dinner with Andre kind of way, you're like, oh, I think I'm ready for Jonah to stop hating Spider-Man. Like, I'm ready for that era to be put to rest. Like, I don't miss it, you know? Right. Like, I remember it and it's iconic and I want to see it in other things, cartoons, movies, etc. But like, I'm okay with the comics just being this from now on.
Well, it infused their relationship with a new energy and gave Jonah a bigger role, a more important role in the books, which is like, I'm protecting Spider-Man. I have to make up. I was a piece of shit to Peter Parker for all these years, and now I realize he's helped a lot of people. I've got to help him, whether he wants that help or not. It's such a great dynamic. And same thing, you know, I've been enjoying the Osborn stuff, even though you know it's coming, you know, the turn is going to happen. You know, what would that relationship have been like if Norman was more the father figure that he had intended himself to be before going crazy with the Goblin Serum? So I don't know. To me as a writer, like, that's so exciting. Then like, oh, we got another good J. Jonah Jameson creates Spider Slayers one because he hates Spider-Man, but if you only knew story, which has been done to death and done well previously. So I think you have to, like we talked about breaking the toys with Daredevil, like, you gotta be able to play with it. And look, if you break them too much, there's Mephisto. There's all these things you can turn to.
That's the thing with Big Two comics. There's always a reset button. There's always a big red button behind, like,
there's an anti-monitor just outside the panel, ready to
snap his fingers or push a button, and everyone's back to normal, or everything's back in the toy chest.
Only a flashpoint away, and
exactly, everyone's always a flashpoint away. That's right. Are there any characters that you're kind of like, I I wish I were able to jump into that pool. I wish I could just jump on that and really tell that story, or tell my story. And well, I'm not asking for your story, because obviously we did a thing once. We had Jim Zub on, and he told a very strong story about how he had a pitch 17 years ago that Marvel was like, mm-mm. And then one day, a couple of years ago, Brevoort comes to him and he's like, hey, do you have a Squid Game? And he's like, yeah, that was that pitch from 17 years ago. And Tom's like, okay, do it. And that was Murder World. And it was just like, if I had told somebody on a podcast, nobody, like, you know, it would have just been gone. But instead I got to sit on it. So it's like, don't share your ideas. But
yeah,
for the main characters, like, yeah, I speak to this character.
I'll say I have a New Mutant story I've always wanted to do. And you know, Alpha Flight is a team I have a lot of love for. Very excited to see them with their own book. If you can't tell, I like the underdogs.
Yes, I like that though. I think there's so much more potential, and I think it speaks to your point about Daredevil, where it's like they kind of will leave you alone. You know, you'll get to do your thing, and you get to make your mark, and really upset the apple cart, but in a way that is like dramatic and impactful.
Well, I think there's something really freeing about wanting to kind of tell your story of a character, maybe who doesn't have the most iconic stories. You know, I think like when I wrote that X-Men story, it was the hardest thing I've ever had to write.
Really?
It was like, I love every single one of these characters. I've read every good story with them. What is there a new way in on Professor X? You know, and it took me a while, and I found it, I think, hopefully. But it's a lot trickier when you're dealing with that. I think Spider-Man, Batman, you ask people, those are some of the hardest characters to write. Because it's well-worn territory, and you're living in the shadows of, you know, Kraven's
the Giants
or whatever, you know. So
for
me, I think DC has a ton of characters, like I said, that I think only Mark Waid is starting to dust off and use. So like, I'd love a crack at the Atom, Firestorm, you know, characters that are sort of beloved, but maybe haven't gotten a more recent kind of defining story. That does something new with them, but also, you know, respects the kind of the classics. So I don't know, that I'm much more excited by those kind of concepts than, you know, obviously if someone asked me to write Spider-Man, I'm going to write Spider-Man.
Sure. But there's more opportunity with,
but I think I like, you know, I like to think of like, well, what's the thing I loved about this character as a kid, and what is something I've never seen done with that character? And characters like Firestorm haven't been used as much, but I still think have just the same potential as. And I think, you know, Tom King is obviously someone who does a very similar thing of, you know, no one's using Mr. Miracle, no one's using the dingbats of Danger Street. You know, we all like to go through those book, and go, oh yeah, this character, I bet I could come up with something really cool with this character.
Right? Yeah, especially if they've been left alone or in the toy chest for too long. And there's, you know, you got some really original idea. Man, yeah. It's funny, I've asked Tom before about that, where I'm like, what made you pick, you know, Mr. Miracle? What made you pick Vision, etc.? And he's like, oh no, at DC they just call me. They're just like, you know, apparently Human Target, which I would call one of those like almost, if not perfect, just about perfect comics. But it's like that one came from a tweet where somebody was like, oh, pitch Human Target, and he's like, Christopher Chance like takes a sip of bourbon, he gets shot, the end, you know, like, and then he got a call and they were like, but would you do a Human Target book? And he's like, yeah. But they just tell him like, oh, would you do a Mr. Miracle? Would you do this, that, and he's like, sure, I could do that, as opposed to being like, I have a really big idea for this character.
Yeah. That's kind of fun though when you get the assignment. I gotta say,
I like that. Yeah, like
that's been 90% of my comic writing for Marvel has just been like, what about this?
And what about
like, MODOK? I can do that. I can do that. MODOK, I will say, I did. I have loved forever, and that was my choice, because actually when we did the show, they had another character they were interested in, and I was like, what about MODOK? But he fits my, you know, no one's really told the definitive MODOK story.
Sure.
Except Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby has told the definitive. Don't come at me. Yeah, so I think I've always gravitated towards that. But yeah, I know that there's been a few times where I've been able to pitch that. But even we were, when they asked us to do the Marvel comic of MODOK, it was a really hard challenge because it was like, forget we've been living with this version of the character for this long in the show.
Mm-hmm.
That's not who they asked us to write a story about. So we kind of have to start from scratch.
Over. Yeah.
Some of the character elements, you know, the arrogance, the ego, you know, that stuff, but write this version. So that was kind of a fun challenge. But I think those assignments are the best, where they're like, here's a concept, here's a character, 4 issues, what do you got? And, you know, I've been given some weird ones like baseball venom and spider box, and you're like, I can make this work. I can have fun with this.
Yeah. Did they pitch you that? Or did you get to come up with baseball venom? Was that like?
Yes, baseball venom. I won't speak out of turn here. I think telling the story of that, but it was an image they just liked. I think they'd seen a piece of art. And they said, we want to do a baseball venom story, and I think the original plan was it was going to be released at like Yankee or Mets Stadium as a giveaway, and it was going to be a 4-issue miniseries. And, you know, I pitched them out a whole story, and it was going to be 616 Eddie Brock and all the stuff. And then I forgot what went wrong with it, something. And then a year later, they were like, how about we just do a 5-page story with baseball venom? And I was like, all right, I'll just condense the 4 issues into this, and we'll do it. But again, it was like, okay, this concept is ridiculous.
Totally. Yeah.
But what I love about comics is the ridiculous stuff. So what if the most humor I can get out of this is to play it as straight as possible?
Completely.
And do it noir. And I think, like, I never run from those kinds of assignments because I'm like, oh yeah, those, like, I read NFL Super Pro. I'm in. Let's do this.
Yes. That was deadly serious, despite its intrinsic, you know, emptiness.
Yeah. But the best comics are the comics that ride the line. I'm not saying NFL Super Pro is one of the best comics, but a lot of the, you know, Jason Aaron, Grant Morrison stuff walks that fine line of absurdity and kind of taking yourself seriously. And that to me is the magic formula of comics.
Well, and I think it also is in the lifeblood of the Minor Threats universe.
Yes, absolutely. we love crab people and you know, people who talk to pigeons, and we find them to be very serious characters.
Yes,
who deserve our time.
Right. When you develop when you're working with a team like Tim Seeley or Patton Oswalt, when you're working on like this universe, I'm curious about the world building aspect of it, because it is so rich and deep, and because I can imagine the temptation of being like, ooh, like this is how the, you know, the economic system works, and this is how the subway system works now, and this is how these characters interact, and what about, like, what if is the president have superpowers? You know, at what point do you, like, how much do you build out of that universe, and how much do you go like, well, that's not really that important? You know, how do you self-regulate that kind of enthusiasm?
Well, I think a lot of that, like, we would get, you know, ideas and images from Scott Hepburn's art that would just send us going. But I think you know, you could go down the rabbit hole for sure. And, you know, everything I always start or work on starts with character. And, you know, the book, even the way it was structured, especially the first one, allowed us to have these like rings of focus. So it was like, okay, we got to find this. The stakes are very clear. We got to find this guy by the end of the night, get the bounty before anyone else gets him, and the heroes get up. You know, bam, goal, A to B. Then each issue would focus on a different character. So there's another ring in, and it would be like, okay, this is Scalpel's issue, so we know she's going to have something to do in this issue that kind of moves the story closer to that end goal. We're going to focus on her and her backstory, so the world building will be born out of that, and whatever they encounter needs to kind of, you know, relate to her in some way, you know. So this is a character who's talking about her father and these regrets and things about her dad and the way she viewed him and the way she's going to do things, and then let's put that character through a time bubble, you know, where there's all these other alternate realities happening all around her, and this is a place that reminds her of her dad, because before the time bubble she used to buy flowers there, you know, whatever. And it was always like in service of character, and then in service of the goal of the book itself. But, you know, we needed a chase scene. Well, what then, you know, what do you have in a superhero city? A time bubble. So like, it would be born out of necessity,
Right.
the world building, or the stuff, where does Frankie live? What's the bad side of a neighborhood look like? Well, what if there's a fallen, mech and they're holding up, mobile homes, like it was all, you just ask yourself these questions as your character's taking you through the journey versus like, here are all the things in the city and they've got to hit them all. And then looks over. It was just kind of, we were finding our way through the city with the characters and it would dictate the world building around them.
I think that speaks to the strength of Minor Threats and to that extent the alternates, where it is about the story and characters, and the universe is built out of their struggles. So as a result, it doesn't feel like a like an assignment or like a like an opportunity to be clever. It's more like the cleverness or the humor or the seriousness of the absurdity is born out of the journey that you're going on as the reader, and in your case as the writers, which I think is a great opportunity here, like for fun fiction, where it's like, oh, you buy it, as opposed to being like, because if you pitch subversive take on classic Silver Age superheroes, it's like, oh, well, put it in the pile of forgotten ideas that people have had for the last 55 years. But this one feels like it rises to the top because it feels real, or at least it feels legit. And it's like, that's cool.
I think it's just a journey you go on as a writer where my earliest stories, I was doing my Star Wars ripoff or whatever, and I'd start with like the vehicles, whatever. This would be cool. Let's put that in there. And then, you get older and you're like, oh, people just care about characters. You gotta love the characters. You gotta love the journey they're on, their arcs and stuff. And then everything else is based on questions and decisions and places they inhabit, and all that kind of comes naturally.
Isn't it true? Like, you wouldn't have like a full-scale model of the Nostromo if Aliens sucked.
Right.
Or if it was like, or Ripley wasn't interesting.
Yeah. You care about those characters, and therefore you care about the world they inhabit. Because we've seen even bad sequels to things we love, and we don't buy the toys from those ones.
We don't have the guy who played the dad in Clueless as action figure from Alien Resurrection.
No, we don't have that. We don't have the bad RoboCop guy 3. From RoboCop 3 toys.
Yeah, I don't have flying.
You only get the one RoboCop. From 1.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah, I only have the melting guy from RoboCop 1. Yeah, no, it's true. Or like, I get excited when like we're at San Diego Comic-Con and there's that booth over there where like they have all these like models from movies, and I always go over there and go like, how much? $1,200? Yeah, $1,200. Okay, well, I'll just look at them from over here and not buy them. But like the that transport ship that they use in Aliens to get the crew into Hadley's Hope, and it's just like a golf cart with a lot of shit all over it. Like, it's such a James Cameron thing. He's like, well, we only have about like $55 to make this car. Put a bunch of crap all over it. It looks like Elon Musk's current design for that supercar that he just come out with. And it's like, that sucks, but I want one because I love Aliens, because I love Ripley and Apone and everybody.
It takes me back to the feeling of the movie. Yeah, I've been tempted many times to buy the Blade Runner gun. Not that I love guns or care that much, or I think it's that cool, but Harrison Ford looked really cool having it, and Deckard is a great character, and I want to have a piece of Deckard.
Dude, I'm so on that same wavelength where I'm like, at some point I got Mal's pistol from Firefly, and I was like, I should have like an armory. I should have like on the wall of like guns from sci-fi, the only movies I like. And then I got like a phaser, and then I looked into like Zerg's weapon, and I'm like, none of these things are ever going to be purchased. Everything is out of my price range immediately, so that's never going to happen. But yeah, no.
That's hilarious.
But dude, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for giving me a crack at Alternates, which is coming out in 2 weeks. If you haven't already, folks, you should definitely pick up the first issue and, of course, the subsequent 4 issues that come out. We are past final order cutoff because it comes out in 2 weeks.
Right.
So
buy them or ask them to hold you.
So just ask them to hold it for you, because just tell your local. Because the reality is, if your local comic book store has all the copies that they've ordered in their reservation list, they'll have to order more, and then then the Tom, Dick, and Harrys that come off the street, of which there are thousands, of course, after every superhero movie comes out, they'll have to fend for themselves. But definitely tell people you want a copy of Alternates #1 because it's super dope. It's just a really cool
thank
book.
you, man.
Of course. And by the way, another opportunity to mention that like this does not feel like it's written by 3 different people. This is one of those things where it feels like it feels like it's one voice throughout, which is always a treat. That's always like a struggle for me when it comes to like multiple writers on one book, where I'm like,
right, who wrote
feels
what?
like who wrote what section, you know?
It was very organic, passing the script back and forth, very hive mind. I think we loved the same comics, so the references, the tone, it was all very easy to kind of.
Yeah, I'm sure there's moments where you're like, oh, you did the thing. I was gonna do that. I was gonna make that exact reference. So I'm glad we're on the same page. Yeah. But anything else? Any other place they can find you and your stuff that they?
I'm on Twitter, Blue Sky. I don't really go on Threads, but I'm on there too. As Bloom Jordan, and Instagram, all those places. And if you are curious about the previous Minor Threats book, the trade is available everywhere. I just got to see it at a Barnes and Noble, which was very fun to see it in the wild. Cool. Yeah, it's out there, and we have some more coming, some announcements coming. The Minor Threats world is continuing to grow, but this is our first spinoff, and we're very proud of it.
That's great. I'll put a copy of the Minor Threats trade paperback in the comments down below, so pick up a copy if you want, and of course check out the alternates coming out. Was September 12th, September 13th? 13th. Thanks a lot for being here, Jordan, and we'll see you guys next time with another episode.
Thanks so much.